Hello, beautiful people, and welcome, to the Hexenzirkel. We have gotten multiple leaks for buffs to characters related to the Hexenzirkel, and there's a lot to say about them, so we're just gonna get right into it. They are adding a new racist resonance in the game. For the sake of this thing, I'll be referring to it as either the Hexenzirkel Resonance, the Hex Resonance, the Witch Resonance, the Witch Passive, whatever. But basically, all of the Hexenzirkel related characters that they've specified will have an extra effect that will only be activated if there are two witches on the team. Right, so two characters related to the Hexenzirkel. A lot of these characters are also getting direct buffs, even outside of Hexenzirkel teams, but most of the buffs are Witch Resonance buffs. Anyways, the characters that are getting put into the Hexenzirkel, there's Durin, the new character, and then for the old characters, we have Mona, Albedo, Klee, Venti, Sucrose, Fischl, and Razor. I don't think I'm gonna record a first impressions on Durin specifically. I guess I might as well just talk about Durin in this one. His skill gives him energy, and his burst deals all field damage. He has two modes, one damage mode and one support mode. In the damage mode, his multipliers are a bit higher, and he gains melt and vape damage bonus to himself. So if he's triggering reactions, they'll deal more damage. In the support mode, the multipliers are a bit lower, but instead, he shreds resistances of elements involved in power reactions that are happening on your team, but not Hydro and Cryo. So if you want to play Durin in a team that's Hydro or Cryo or whatever, he's not shredding. So either he's just applying pyro and not giving any shred, or he's the one actually getting the damage by him being on the carry mode. The shred is 35% with the witch bonus, 20% without it, and the amount of reaction damage increase is 40% without the witch bonus and 70% with it. Overall, Durin is kind of boring and also not that great, but that doesn't mean he's not valuable at all, because honestly, the main thing that he's going to be doing is he's going to be one half of the Witch Resonance that's going to be necessary to have on your team to activate the new effects of the old characters that got massively buffed. But next we can talk about the stuff I'm actually excited about. I think we can start with the most straightforward one. Sucrose buff. When you have two witches on your team, using Sucrose's abilities gives a little bit of damage bonus. 5.7% on skill, 7.1% on burst, and another 8.5% to the C6. Basically, it's just a tiny little bit of damage percent on top of Sucrose's things, but this one doesn't matter too much, so it is what it is. Sucrose did not need a buff, so she didn't really get a buff. This is more so about Sucrose being part of the Witch Resonance and enabling witch bonuses on other characters. The other character that got a buff that I think doesn't matter too much is Venti. Venti got some pretty big buffs, but what was buffed about Venti is a new playstyle for damage-focused Venti. While the burst is active, Venti's normal attacks get an Animo Infusion and deal a lot more damage and extend the burst duration by up to 2 seconds. He also got a Witch Resonance bonus that makes his burst deal 1.35 times the damage, and when the burst is active, when animal characters trigger Swirl, they gain 50% damage bonus. So it makes him a little bit better as a support for other animal carries, and it also gives him damage percent if you're playing him as a carry, which you can do now. The thing is, right now, the animal carries that we have are mainly Wanderer and Chow. With these buffs, Venti as like a fully damage-focused carry is going to be a bit better than Wanderer, pretty similar to Chow. But those aren't really characters that see that much play in the meta right now, so as much as like these are pretty massive buffs to Venti, it's not really enough to justify wanting to use Venti as a carry. But it does make him playable. He's also got buffs to his constellations, but I don't really care that much about that. But yeah, that's basically it for the buffs that don't matter too much. What's left is two types of buffs. Buffs to bad carries that make them good, and buffs to supports that just make them a lot better. Let's start with the bad carries that become good. So we start with Klee. Right now, the Ascension passive of Klee's that allows her to get a free charge attack that doesn't cost stamina and deals more damage it's just a yes-no thing. Either you have the effect or you don't. With the changes, instead of being a yes-no thing, you can stack it and you can get up to 3 stacks of it. And the way that it works is basically when you hit an enemy with one of Klee's attacks, you have a 50% chance of generating a stack. But if you can't stack multiple, then if you get 2 back-to-back, it's as if you only got 1. and then if you miss the next two, it's as if you got 0 for the next one. So you end up losing out on some potential procs. And the fact that you can now stack up to 3, right? And it's not that it triples the effect, it's just that you can have 3 like banked for later, makes this a lot more consistent. The effect of the stack is still the same. It's still that the charge attack doesn't consume stamina and deals more damage. But she now has 2 pretty massive witch bonuses. One, during her burst, Klee's normal attack sequence does not reset. So what that means is, like, usually when your normal attack sequence is interrupted by a normal or by a walk or a dash or whatever, you just start over from the first one. This is gonna make it so that it doesn't happen that way anymore. It doesn't get reset. So if you get interrupted, if you dash, if you walk, if you jump, if you scale, whatever, after doing it for the first normal attack, the next time you do normal attack, it'll be the second one. That's the first effect. And the second effect here is when you do the third normal attack, you get a coordinated charge attack. We don't know for a fact that this is just a normal charge attack because it has an actual name. So it's possible it has a separate scaling, but we aren't provided with a separate scaling. So for now, I'm just going to be assuming it's a normal extra charge attack. That's kind of all right. It is what it is. But there's another effect. Each time Klee deals damage with pretty much anything, she gains a stack of Boom Booster, which lasts for 20 seconds. And she doesn't consume them. So basically, this is permanently fully stacked. And when she has 3 stacks, her charge attacks deal 1.5 times damage as like a true multiplier. So they're like making it so that you get more charge attacks, your charge attacks will have the explosive spark more often, and the damage of those explosive spark enhanced charge attacks is significantly higher. Now, because they're straight up changing the way that her attack strings work, we can't test combos for buffed Klee with live. So there's gonna have to be some assumptions for Klee stuff, but from what I've looked at, if you assume just normal attack spam Klee, which is pretty bad, post-buff normal attack spam Klee is actually a bit better than current min-max GC Sim rotation Klee. And if you assume min-maxed GC Sim rotation equivalent, Klee at C0 will be able to reach around, with the combo assumptions I've been using, around 90k. But because Klee is a character that is on the To Temper Thyself and Journey Far event, for people that really like Klee and that go for Klee, they will eventually end up with a free constellation for her. And she actually goes to like 105, 110k DPS, which is pretty good. For comparison, Varessa's non-Maoika teams generally tend to be at around 110k. And it would be a very similar team that you would use. But this is with GG Sim combos, right? And personally, Klee is probably the character that I suck at playing the most in the whole game. I cannot play Klee for the life of me. I think she's the hardest character to do like basic combos on. So it remains to be seen how realistic this like 105 to 110k is. I'm not too optimistic about it, honestly. And again, right, this is with C1. At C0, it's like 90. And if you're not doing those combos, it's gonna be lower than that. But these are very massive buffs, obviously, and there are, like, Klee is actually a pretty solid character, assuming those combos are doable. And now let's talk about the second buffed carry, Razor. And, oh boy, Razor is getting massive buffs. First, not a witch bonus, he just gets this as a whole. His burst damage, like the coordinated attack from the burst on like when he's doing normal attacks, is increased by, like, the motion value is increased by 70%, which is like over 1,000 motion value. Also a base kit buff, but for constellations, right? That's not reliant on Witch Resonance. When Razor obtains a sigil, so what he gets when he uses his tap E, he gains 3 instantly instead of 1, which is gonna help his energy generation. And after a sigil is consumed, Razor gets 70 crit value for 15 seconds. But then also, whenever his sigil count exceeds the limit, whenever his sigil count goes above 3, so when he generates sigils, when he already has sigils, a lightning strike is triggered, which deals 150% of his attack as damage. That's not that big of a deal, but which also restores 7 energy. And that is a big deal because it basically completely trivializes his ER requirements in pretty much every team. Now, right now, Razor kinda sucks. Razor's best teams are not physical teams. Razor's best teams are generally overload teams. The reason for that is because right now, there's about a 50-50 split between his physical damage and his electro damage. It's actually a little bit more electro than physical, which means that no matter which one you buff, you're only buffing 50% of what you could be buffing. However, Chaleur's teams tend to have a lot of buffs that are both to electro and pyro damage, and Bennett's C6 makes Razor's physical attacks pyro instead. On top of that, he now applies a bunch of element and he triggers overload on himself, so he gets a pretty good amount of personal damage from overloads. These buffs are very impactful for these overload teams. And as we're going to see later, Fischl is also getting a buff, and Fischl is the last lot you use with Bennett Chauveur's Razor. And C6 Razor is now just a tiny little bit shy of 100k DPS with C6 Bennett, C6 Chauveur's, C6 Fischl. If you don't have Bennett C6, the damage completely tanks, because all the normal attack damage doesn't get buffed by Chauveur's pyro damage buff, by Bennett's pyro damage buff, or by the shred you get to pyro resistance from Chauveur's. So his damage completely tanks without Bennett C6. His damage completely tanks without Chauveur's C6. And his damage completely tanks without his own C6, because 70%. And Fischl's personal damage in that team completely tanks without her C6. And the buff too, as we're going to see later. So it's like, it's a team that's very reliant on those 4-star character constellations. But if you do have them, Razor is like more so Chlorine level than like Raiden level now. And that's without a good set bonus. The current best set that you use on him for these teams is fucking Echoes. And Gilded is like 1% behind. If he had a set that provides about as many stats as Codex does to Natlan characters, which honestly I think is very likely to happen, I'm pretty confident that one of the set bonuses we're gonna get in 6.3 or whatever is gonna be a Hexenzirkel like damage set, because it's a problem not just for Razor but also for Durin and for Klee. But yeah, I looked at how the team DPS would be if he had a set that provides as many stats as Codex does, and it's like 110k, which is like, well, at that point it's not even Chlorine level anymore. It's like Varessa level. These buffs are insane. All right, like that's just what it boils down to. I think it's very likely he ends up getting nerfed, because like with the Bennett Fischl Chauveur's core for overload, you can do any pyro carry, and Razor is better than every pyro carry in that slot. Right, because Mawika doesn't get fighting spirit, so it's not really Mawika, and he's better than Arlecchino, better than Klee too. So I really expect Razor to get gutted. Honestly, I don't think these buffs are gonna make it to live, because they're just too much, man. I mean, I would be pretty happy for the buffs to make it to live, because I think it's cool. Anyways, now let's move on to the support buffs. So Fischl, the buff is she gets a Witch Resonance buff, which provides stats when you trigger reactions. If you trigger Overload, she provides attack percent. If you trigger Electrocharge, she provides EM. 22.5% attack, 90 EM. So in Chauveur's teams, that's 22.5% attack. In Flynn's teams, that's 90 EM. At C6, those effects are doubled. So 45% attack, 180 EM. That's a lot of stats. So that's cool. This is part of why this Razor team is popping off. Anyways, what's left is Albedo and Mona. I think it's pretty fair to say that both of these characters are actually just good characters now. Albedo gets 2 main buffs. When you have a Witch Resonance on your team, Albedo's skill, when it deals damage, you get like a phantom version of the skill on the field on top of your real one. And that effect can happen twice. And if your actual skill breaks, but you have a phantom skill on the field, you keep dealing damage. So it helps prevent issues that arise when Albedo's skill gets broken. But also, each phantom skill on the field increases the damage of his skill procs. And it's basically a 50% increase per, so it doubles the damage if you have 2 of them. That's the first effect. So basically, his damage is doubled for fun. The second effect, using his skill and generating a phantom skill, buff your team's damage percent. I think this is a little weird, because the way that this is worded implies that it only works on witches, but I feel like it's weird that he has 2 different effects that do the same thing for the same characters with different scalings. So I believe that the weaker one of the 2 effects is supposed to be to every character, and the stronger one of the 2 is only for witches. But yeah, so basically Albedo buffs damage percent by a percentage of his defense. For every 1,000 defense, it's 4% damage percent, and then witches get an additional 10. So at about 3,000 defense, which is generally what you get to, and the witch bonus caps at 3,000 defense, so you generally don't really want to go for more than that. At 3,000 defense, he gives 12 damage percent to non-witches and 42 damage percent to witches. So they're doubling his damage and giving him a Cinder City equivalent of damage percent on his kit. This is a lot. Albedo's just kind of goated now. His damage is like way higher than Tiori's, and he's buffing the team. He also still has the EM buff from the burst, so for reaction teams you get to use that, so that's cool. They're also buffing his constellations, and unlike Venti, just like Klee. Albedo is a character that is available from the Constellation Selector event, so we can talk about his C1. His C1 generates energy when his skill hits. This is like okay, and it gives him more defense percent, which is alright. His C1 isn't that good. Honestly, they buffed the C2 so much more than the C1. If you accidentally got C1 Albedo when you got him back in like, what was it, 1.3? Getting C2 from the Selector I think is a pretty good idea because the C2 is pretty solid, but it is not worth going for the C1 plus getting the C2 from Selector for like 2025 standards of Constellation power. And finally, we have Mona. C1, which is the Constellation that increases Hydro reaction damage, now increases the damage more for off-field characters than on-field characters. The increase goes to 24 instead of 15 for off-field characters. C2, right now, is when a normal attack hits, there's 20% chance that you get a free extra charge attack. What they're changing is they're making it so that the first normal attack you do after burst does it always, and it does it by default, so guaranteed. And after Mona's charge attack hits an opponent, you get an 80 EM buff to the team. So basically, plus 80 EM on Mona's C2. And then C6, right now the C6 is complete dog shit because in order to get the damage bonus from the C6, you need to enter her alternate sprint and stay in it for multiple seconds. And by the way, the C6 increases her damage percent for each second she spends in her alternate sprint of her next charge attack, 60% per second up to 180%. This C6 change makes it so that one, instead of needing to be inside of your sprint, it also stacks when there's an enemy affected by her omen. So you just get this to stack without having to do the dash anymore. And two, for some reason, Mona's charge attacks to enemies affected by omen are multiplied by 2. They do twice the damage, just for fun. Just multiply the damage by 2. So 180 damage percent and double the motion value. For people that got C6 Mona from like losing 50/50s and shit, or from standard selectors or whatever, the C6 basically triples the charge attack damage. Forward vape Mona is gonna be a real thing. But if it wasn't for the witch change, that wouldn't be that big of a change because the omen only lasts for 5 seconds. So what is the new witch bonus? 1. When her normal charge attacks hit opponents, she gains a Phantasmal Bubble. If a character in your party triggers Vaporize, you consume Phantasmal Bubble to increase the vape damage. Basically, when you're on-fielding Mona, each normal attack increases your off-fielder's next vape by 10%, up to 30. But the real big one is, additionally, when Mona's normal or charge attack hits an opponent affected by an omen, the omen duration is extended by 2 seconds up to a maximum of 8 seconds. That's a 13-second omen duration. Mona's actually like an actual character now. C0 Mona, just from this, is going to become a pretty solid support for Mualani. I think Mualani is probably the character that benefits the most from this Mona change because your second Hydro options from Mualani teams suck ass, but because Mualani's burst is pretty good and Hydro Resonance is pretty impactful on her, having a good second Hydro is nice. With Mualani, the sort of rotations you'll want to be doing, this enemy is affected by Hydro, so we won't be able to show actual vapes, but we can show the setups. So Mona E, Mawika QE, Mona Burst, N4, Sucrose E and 1, then Mualani. And then start over. Oops. 1, 2, 3, 4. And then when you have your burst, you just do 2 chomps into burst instead of 3 chomps. And you just keep repeating this. One of the biggest problems with current VV setups for Mualani is that Mualani's Hydro app kind of sucks for the setups, which is one of the really, really major upsides of having double Hydro Mualani. Because you've got someone else doing the Hydro application for you, you don't have to deal with Mualani's cringe charge attack. You get to have your Hydro Aura from Mona's stuff instead. And we might as well go show the actual rotation against an enemy. 1, 2, 3, 4. We'll look at the damage. Oh. Classic Molani. Unfortunately, Mona doesn't fix these problems. Let's try to show an actual one. 1, 2, 3, 4. Sucrose E.
Let me scrub. Wrath from the sky. Fate is upon you.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Absorption test. Carving waves.
Also classic Molani. But hopefully you guys get the idea. Mona's longer omen duration allows you to go Mona into Sucrose, which means it's really easy to have a Hydro when you swap to Sucrose. You get better Sucrose uptime. But yeah, these things are like actually massive. And by the way, I'm pretty sure if you're playing this team, you want to go like Proto Amber, Clam, Mona. Or Proto Amber, Soya Days Past. One of those two. Because Mona's personal damage isn't that high, and there's no good support set that works because she doesn't proc Constructor. Technically, you probably can make her proc Constructor if you add a Malika N1. Yeah, like this procs Instructor. So I guess technically you could give her Instructor. Honestly though, I think this kind of makes Molani good. As the #1 Molani hater, I really like how this team feels to play. So once we get the Mona buffs and the damage isn't like dog shit because we have no Omen uptime here, I'll be playing this team. Like actually. It's also something you can do with Durin Chilonin instead of Malika Sucrose. But yeah, there's also a lot of other Mona stuff. You can use Mona with Durin. That's kind of like the kind of intended thing with Mona, right? They're making it so that she buffs off fielders more. So you're kind of supposed to be doing her as a driver for Durin, but they gave Durin standard ICD on his burst, which is his main form of damage. So he only vapes half his damage, so it kind of just isn't that good. Anyways, Mona is also now going to be a viable choice for, like, Vape Malika. You still don't get to vape as much with Mona as you do with other Hydros, but you vape enough, and the buffs are big enough to make up for it. Not entirely sure what the rotations are going to look like, because the swirl setups are going to be a lot harsher for Pyro than they are for Hydro with these Mona teams, but it is what it is. Yeah, all in all, I think the biggest effect that all these buffs have on my, like, feelings going forward is Mona constellations become a lot more valuable to pick up from the standard selector. I'd say C6 Mona is much better than C6 Stealth Nutty or Dea in terms of how much she does for your account, and she's actually just good now. The C1 got a direct buff, the C2 got a direct buff with the 80 EM, the C4 got an indirect buff from the Omen just lasting longer, but also, I don't know if I said that, I think I skipped over it, it also gets a direct buff where witches gain 15 crit damage on top of the 15 crit rate. The C6 got a massive direct buff. But even just C0 Mona is like actually good now. One thing I'll say is don't underestimate Albedo. I wouldn't say that Albedo's a character that's worth picking up now, like if he gets a rerun. But if you have an Albedo lying around, he might be an upgrade to one of your teams. That's very, very possible. He's actually like doing a lot now. Anyways, that's kind of it for my first impressions. I'd say right now, the big changes that are actually very meta relevant are Molani and Albedo. Molani, Albedo, and Fischl. I think Venti carry is kind of a meme. I think Klee carry, I mean, it's good for people to have Klee, but it's not enough to make people want to go for Klee. And I think Razor is way too reliant on all the 4-star constellations. Like, missing out on one of those 4-star constellations is like a massive DPS loss. So, did I say Molani instead of Mona? I meant Mona, yeah. Personally, I'm the most excited about the Razor ones, but I don't think they're that big of a deal as a whole. The main thing that's gonna propel Durin into relevance is activating Mona and Albedo's witch passives, which is kind of sad. It's kind of sad, honestly. One thing about Durin, though, Virgin Durin is gonna pop the f off. That's like the one team where his kit actually makes sense. Relatively slow application with fast hits, shreds Dendro resistance, doesn't really have high ER requirements, so he doesn't need to sacrifice EM for that. Really long uptime. He's the perfect Virgin characters. I'm a believer in Virgin Durin. We'll see how that goes. But yeah, that's pretty much it for today. Hope you enjoyed. I hope you learned a thing or two. And I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye, YouTube.